E ka mana, e ka reo, e ka excuse me, e ka mauka whakahi, e ka awawa, e ka pātaka o ka toka tuku iho, tēnā koutou. Ko waio, ko David Murdoch tōku ingoa, ko o te me whakarai o te whare wananga o tāgo, nō reira tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Excuse me, my voice nearly lost. For those who don't know me, my name's David Murdoch. I'm the Vice-Chancellor of the University, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you all here today for the celebration of Sue Kringle's promotion to Professor. It's one of the great pleasures of my job to be part of these events, and as you may know, we've had quite a disrupted program of inaugural professorial lectures over the past 2 to 3 years, and it's great to be on track again. And I think for Sue, it's after about 3 or 4 delays we've managed to get here in the end, so it's a really wonderful, Sue, to be here. My main role is to welcome you all, and I do want to give a big warm welcome to everyone who's here today, everyone who's here online and either watching it live or watching it later on. Big welcome. Those in the wider university community, those from the wider Dunedin community, senior colleagues, but especially to Sue's whānau and friends. And I do believe we have some special guests in the audience today. I think we have Sue's mother, Jenny, Uncle Royd, Auntie Shona, and Auntie Pam. Kia ora, and big welcome to you all. And I know there are many others who have supported Sue throughout her career who will be watching this presentation today. I will be very shortly handing over to Emma Wyeth to give a more detailed introduction to Sue's career. But I do want to have a few personal words for a start, because I've known of Sue for many years, but only in the last few years have we actually got to know each other. And that's largely through the COVID era. We've been on a number of committees together and largely met via Zoom, but it has been a real privilege for me to work with Sue. And I've learned a few things about Sue that I thought I'd just share before passing over to Emma. And with Sue, we have someone whose expertise is highly sought after and highly valued, someone who is always measured and direct in her opinions and never afraid to speak up, and I think we know what I mean. Someone who is utterly committed to Māori health equity and to addressing inequities in health status and health outcomes, and whose humble nature belies a hugely impressive CV. And that's measured taken by any measure. Sue's CV reveals remarkable productivity across teaching, research and service activities. And I guess we'll hear some of that maybe from Emma and certainly from Sue, but I certainly want to mention about Sue's more recent role, being on the inaugural board of Te Aka Whaiora, the new Māori Health Authority, and I think that's an absolute testament to Sue's mana, and really huge to you for that. So you've already left a large legacy, and I can't help be reminded of the point Ngāi Tahu Whakatauki, mō tātou, mō ka uri a muri aki nei, for us and for our children after us. And so congratulations on this really well-deserved promotion, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing your lecture, and I'll pass over to Emma. So nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.
He mihi mahana kia koutou. So as David said, it's my great pleasure to introduce my good friend and dear colleague this evening to deliver her inaugural professorial lecture. Now, I'm not actually going to talk about Sue's career because she's had an amazing career, and we couldn't capture it all here tonight in just a few minutes. So I'm going to talk about Sue and a little story that I think resonates with who Sue is and what she does. So, as some of you already know, and the rest of you will shortly learn, that Professor Sue Kringle is deeply passionate about the health and wellbeing of New Zealanders, and of course, in particular, Māori. As such, she's a leading researcher and teacher of some of the multiple health inequities that Māori individuals, whānau and communities bear the burden of, and of course, the solutions to such challenges. Crucially, Sue is a politically engaged intellectual and is a known face on our many kaitahu marae, especially at her beloved Oraka Aparima. She definitely isn't one who remains ensconced in the ivory tower. Sue was raised in Te Ika ao Māui in Wellington and Auckland and completed her medical degree at that other university. But by disposition and whakapapa and now geography, she's very much of the South. And if my marriage has taught me anything, it's that with latitude comes attitude, and Sue very much embodies that. So I was reminded of this more recently while reading through Volume 2 of Tangata Ngaitahu, The People of Ngaitahu. In particular, the biography of Hida Munro, née Stirling. Hida was born at Waimatuku in the mid-1870s. She was the portakey of a whānau of 6. Hida spent chunks of her childhood at Bluff and on the Aparima Native Reserve. An active member of the Salvation Army from the age of 16, a noted singer, Hida toured Te Ika ao Māui, New South Wales and Victoria as a Salvationist. She later joined the Anglican Church, undertaking mission and teaching work in the Whanganui River in the Hawke's Bay and at Ohinemusu in Rotorua. Along the way, Hida collaborated with the nascent Young Māori Party that emerged from within Te Aute College and was primarily focused on improving Māori health. As an extension of this, she was a staunch prohibitionist and key Māori member of the Women's Christian Temperance Union, along with my great-grandmother's sister, Pani Te Tau, whose father, the long-serving Southern Māori MP, Tami Parata, was a pivotal figure in shaping Māori health policy nationally. Hida was also happy to publicly call out male kaitahu leaders, not saying anything here, Sue, that she disagreed with, as occurred at Tuahiwi in 1925. Now, I'm not suggesting that Sue has consciously modelled herself on people like Hida, but I'm pretty sure we won't be treated to a solo soprano performance tonight, for example, but feel free to prove me wrong. Notwithstanding, it seems to me that there are several parallels between these two remarkable Southern kaitahu women. Sue, like Hida, has risen to prominence within national organisations committed to enhancing Māori health. Sue, like Hida, has collaborated with hapu in places beyond Te Waipounamu and across Te Ika ao Māui. But in doing all of these things, Sue's talents and values, as with Hida earlier, are, I think, shaped hugely by her kaitahu whakapapa and lifelong connections to our resilient whānau at Oraka and Aparima. And if we look at the final photo in Hida's biography in Tangata Ngaitahu 2, we find her in her later years in about 1945 at Oraka visiting her good friend and whanoka, Ahenata Kaitai Cleaver, and Ahenata's mokopuna, Reina Kringle. Reina is Sue's aunt, her father's older sister, now in her 90s in Invercargill. And Reina had hoped to join us all here this evening, but I know she will be thinking of you, Sue. And I've no doubt you're all thinking of your dad, Brian, tonight. He would have been very, very proud of you and your many achievements over your lifetime. So to conclude this introduction, let me say that in the long history of our iwi, I'm quite confident that one day, in the very distant future hopefully, a biography of Professor Sue Kringle will sit alongside people like Hida Munro in a future volume of Tangata Ngaitahu, continuing to inspire our future generations. But tonight, it is us who will be inspired. So without further ado, Eho, the floor is yours.
I te mea tūtahi, hei mihi nui ki a koe Emma mō tō mihi ki a hau I te ahi hei pōnei, tēnā koe. Ki ngā rangatira o tēnei whare wānanga, tēnā koutou. Huri noa ki a tātou katoa, kua taumai I roto I te kaupapa o te pōnei, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Right, let's just rock into it. Ko take timu te waka, ko take timu te pai maunga, ko te ara kiwa, te moana, ko nai tahu ka te mamui me waitaha o ko iwi, ko nai te rua hiki hiki, me huirapa o ku hapu, ko te takutai o te titi, tōku marae. And in the photo on the left is te takutai o te titi, which is across the road from Te Ara Kiwa or Fovo Strait. It's in Oraka or Colac Bay, which is where Dad grew up and his whānau grew up. The building was the Colac Bay School before the Rūnaka purchased it at full market rates in 1996 when it had been declared surplus to Crown needs. Mum grew up in Ototo and has ancestral connections to Germany, Scotland, Ireland and England. Dad left home and joined the Navy when he had just turned 16. And Mum met him through his sister Anne when they were at Teachers College together. And she moved to Auckland to be with him after she'd finished Teachers College. Growing up, we moved between Auckland and Wellington, living in Porirua, Elston and Titahi Bay in Wellington, and in Belmont, Pakuranga in Auckland. The photo on the left is 1980, and it's my first year at mid school. I'm the one in the centre, and behind me my very good mates, still lifelong mates, David Tipene Leach and Paparangi Reid, and Wendy Walker is a paediatrician in Auckland, she's on the left, and Ted Hughes is an anaesthetist. I was a Polynesian preference scheme admission to medical school, which these days is called the Māori and Pacific Admission Scheme. And in my year, there were 6 of us, 4 Māori and 2 people with Pacific whakapapa. The photo on the right are the group that were my buddies and flatmates through medical school. I'm really honoured to have Sarah here tonight. And that photo was taken in Dunedin, in Bluff, in December last year. We'd arranged that we're all going to have a get-together for my IPL in December, and then decided that we'd carry on with our get-together anyway. I spent 5 years working in a hospital, and then at the beginning of 1991, moved into general practice and worked in a mainstream practice in West Auckland. There were a set of health reforms that were announced in 1991 and then enacted in 1992. And those health reforms really allowed Māori organisations to enter the health sector as providers of healthcare for the first time. And one of the organisations that did that was Te Whānau Waipareira Trust, which is a large urban Māori authority in West Auckland. And I moved there, and alongside Marion Hakaraia, who is the woman in the white shirt, Nikki Turner and myself set up the health services that Waipareira provided. The local GPs weren't particularly happy with the idea, but there was one local GP who took us under our wings. We were so green. I'd done 18 months general practice perhaps. Nikki had arrived back in the country from working in Namibia. And so Peter Wolford took us under his wing and really supported us, and continues to be a very dear friend. And I'm very grateful. He's here as well, I believe. And Peter, yeah. And I'm delighted and thrilled to have you here too, Peter. I started with getting my GP qualifications while I was working at Waipareira, and as part of that, we had to do video consultations, and we got feedback on the video consultations. And Nikki got some feedback about one of her consultations and was told that she was sexually inappropriate. And she had kissed a kuia in welcome as the kuia came into the consultation room. She was a bit perturbed, and I was kind of outraged. The board of the college at the time was having a meeting in Auckland, and there was an open invitation to go along and to see them. And so off I trot, and I expressed my displeasure. I don't think it made much difference. But not long afterwards, I was on the board of the Auckland faculty of the college, and that was my first foray into the College of General Practitioners. I also started my Masters of Public Health at that time. And in 1997, I moved to the university part-time with an HRC Research Training Fellowship to finish my master's thesis, and then went on to do public health medicine training. In 1999, I was awarded a Harkness Fellowship and went to Johns Hopkins in Baltimore. And when I came home, I spent a year working in the National Health Committee Secretariat and the Ministry of Health to see if I wanted to be a bureaucrat. And I returned to the university at the end of that 12 months. And then I went to work in funding and planning at Waitemata and Auckland DHBs in 2012 and started to do clinical general practice again at Tūroki Health Services, which is a large Māori health provider in South Auckland. Moved home in October 2014 and started here at the University of Otago in 2017. So, I want to acknowledge Mina Jackson, who was the first person that I heard talking about myth takes, and his intellect, generosity and kindness is very sorely missed. So there are 3 related myth takes about Māori and health research. We're reluctant to participate in research, we're difficult to recruit to research, and we're difficult to retain in projects. I want to demonstrate that these are indeed myth takes and highlight what's required to ensure that we want to participate and stay involved with projects once we do engage in them. And I'm going to use 4 projects to do this. So the first project was entitled Are There Ethnic Inequities in the Management of Children's Asthma? During my MPH, I'd become aware that there were some inequities in the management of asthma, and we were overrepresented in hospitalisations and mortality. But the studies were quite old. They'd been done in the 80s and maybe the early 90s. Very few of them focused on children, and they were largely focused on people who were admitted to hospital. I want to first acknowledge Ines Asher, who's on the left. She's a professor of paediatrics and respiratory paediatrics. And when I first had this idea, I went along to her and she was so supportive. She was incredibly supportive. And she gave me an old grant application of hers and said, use this as a template for how to write a grant application, because I'd never written one before. And I truly believe that without that template, my application wouldn't have been successful. And actually throughout, in all the subsequent years, whenever I've seen Ines, she's always been incredibly supportive, and she's a remarkable woman. I want to also acknowledge Colin Tupuatonga and Cameron Grant, thank you, and Elizabeth Robinson, who were on the research project with me, and Mavis Roberts and Binky Tawa were the research managers and ran the research team. We started data collecting in May 1999, and in July, I kind of wandered off to Baltimore for a year, and so was away for a full year of the 2 years of data collection. And without Mavis and Binky and Colin and Cameron's supervision, I don't think the project would have got completed. So what we did in this study was we used a community-based sample of the caregivers of children aged 2 to 14 who had a diagnosis of asthma and had had asthma symptoms in the previous 12 months. We identified these people. We got a list of random residential addresses from Stats New Zealand, and someone went out and knocked on the door and said, hello, we're looking to do this study. Do you have any children with asthma living in your house? And we did that for the 10 houses from that address. We used equal explanatory power, so we had 170 caregivers in the Māori, Pacific and other ethnic groups. And because the other population is bigger and therefore has more children with asthma, and we wanted the interviews to all finish at the same time, we used what's called a sampling ratio. So for the other and the Māori groups, not everyone who said that they were interested in participating was actually enrolled into the study. And that's called a sampling ratio. More about that later. We had a questionnaire which asked a whole lot of questions, including things about the child's asthma symptoms, their use of health services because of asthma, what asthma education they'd been given, and what asthma medications the child was given. We had a really high response rate, with over 92% of the Māori caregivers, 88% of the Pacific caregivers, and 89% of the other caregivers who were enrolled into the study completing it. Some of the key findings were that for Māori and Pacific children, they had higher morbidity or asthma symptoms, particularly severe asthma symptoms. Almost all of the children had a regular GP that they went to for asthma care. The Māori and Pacific children had significantly higher GP visits for both acute and routine asthma care, and also had higher use of emergency departments and hospitals. There were significant differences in their caregivers' experience of asthma education, and the Māori and Pacific caregivers reported that they were less likely to get practical demonstrations, so for example, how to show and how to use inhalers. They had less information about pathophysiology, which is the things that cause the asthma symptoms, asthma triggers and action plans, and a smaller percentage reported that the education they received was clear and easy to understand. And as a result, their asthma knowledge, their knowledge about asthma symptoms and triggers and general asthma knowledge was lower than the other caregivers. We also saw that we had some scenarios where we said, if this was happening to your tamariki, what would you do next? And they had lower scores on their scenarios for asthma management as well. In relation to medications, there was lots of use of nebulizers for Māori and Pacific children, but that wasn't accompanied by greater levels of care at other points in the pathway of care. So there were no differences in the proportions of children who were receiving asthma preventers, even though the Māori tamariki had more asthma symptoms. And this was particularly noticeable in the children who reported severe morbidity, where there was serious underuse of asthma preventers in that group. So, what were the things that helped us with the study? Firstly, asthma is a really important issue in Māori communities and a really important question for the caregivers of children with asthma. Our research team were diverse, and we had a diverse range of door knockers and of interviewers. And our interviews included Māori and European and all of the larger Pacific ethnic groups. So that was a culturally safe experience for participants because we used the sampling ratio, we were able to then match the ethnicity of the interviewers and the caregivers. We interviewed people at home or at some other place that suited them, and we provided a koha to them for their time. I probably wouldn't use a sampling ratio again because I actually, in retrospect, saying to people, oh, we know you want to participate, but sorry, you can't, doesn't sit easily. However, it did allow us to match the ethnicity of the interviews, but I don't think I'd use one again. The second study I want to talk about was a cardiovascular disease medicine health literacy trial, and Michelle Lambert has been a dear colleague of mine for a very long time now, and this was the first project that we worked on. It was an international trial and had sites in Canada, Australia and New Zealand. We did it in 2 phases. So in phase 1, we interviewed people and talked to them about what they knew. So these were all Māori who had cardiovascular disease and were on medicines for their cardiovascular disease. And we talked to them about what they'd been told about their medicines, what they would like to know about their medicines, and how they would like to know it. And we used that information to design an intervention, which we then trialled. It was based in, there were 2 urban sites in Canada, an urban site in Australia and an urban and rural site here in Aotearoa. So people participated if they had a diagnosis of cardiovascular disease. We're on medicines, we're on at least 2 of the 4 commonly used groups of medicines to prevent future heart attacks or strokes. The intervention was an education session, which was given to people 3 times over a month period. It was nurse-led, and in Australia they used health educators, and it involved an interactive app on a tablet. People also received a pill card with information about their medicines and a written resource. The information was all standardised, but there were some country-specific features. So, for example, graphics and Indigenous language being used in the resources. Our primary outcome, or the thing we were measured how successful the intervention was looking at people's knowledge about their medicines. And data was collected between February and November 2013. So we didn't have any problems recruiting people, and we had very good retention of people, and we had 171 participants, and we lost 11 to follow-up, 1 in New Zealand and 10 in Australia and Canada, and in New Zealand, one of our participants was admitted to a rest home in another area, so she couldn't continue. I want to briefly show some results as they highlight 2 things. These graphs show the percentage of questions answered correctly, and on the left it's about statins, which is cholesterol medication, and aspirin. And I want to highlight the pre-session 1 scores, which are pretty low. And that was kind of, I think, consistent with what people were telling us in our qualitative interviews. But the intervention really increased people's knowledge, certainly at the end of the intervention. There was a little drop in people's, the percentage of correct answers a week later. So session 2 was a week after session 1, but scores popped up again. And then a little drop at the end of session 3, which was 3 weeks later. And a further increase. And so we were very happy with these results. You can see that the pattern is the same for information about aspirin. We were very happy with these results. And likewise, these are called ACE inhibitors and beta blockers, and they're both 2 groups of medicines that are used for cardiovascular disease. Of course, you might say, it's only a month. And I would say, yes, that's right. But we wouldn't expect, we would expect that if this had been implemented more broadly, that people would receive top-ups. You know, I know for myself, if I'm not using information regularly, I lose it. And I don't know why we expect patients to be given information a couple of times and then somehow remember it forever and ever. So what are the things that helped with this trial? We had co-design of the intervention, so through the qualitative interviews. There was Indigenous leadership and control in all 3 countries. We had excellent non-Indigenous colleagues who really understood and were committed to the kaupapa. And we had excellent relationships with the participating services, who also helped us design how the implementation would go in their clinic. Again, it was an important issue for participants, and they could see the value in it, so they were really keen on participating. And we used appropriate tikanga protocols and processes during recruitment, during the delivery of the intervention. We had a koha for participation, and we also went back to all of the participants and to the sites and fed back the results. The third trial that I want to talk about is called the Impact Polypill trial. So it also focused on cardiovascular disease medications, and I want to acknowledge Vanessa Selak, who ran the trial, and Marty Harwood, who was a co-investigator with me, amongst a very large research team. As we saw with the literacy trial, there are 4 types of medicines that are recommended to prevent cardiovascular disease, and a polypill, which is sometimes called a fixed dose combination pill, incorporates all 4 of those medicines into one capsule or one pill. So in theory, at least, it's easier for people to take. The trial was done in 54 general practices in Auckland and the Waikato, and again, we wanted equal explanatory power. We wanted to recruit equal numbers of Māori and non-Māori. Our primary outcomes were self-reported adherence, so taking the pills at 12 months. We also checked adherence against dispensing information and found that the self-report was very accurate, which was good. We were also interested in whether the trial was acceptable to participants and GPs and whether there was any changes to blood pressure and lipids at 12 months. So the key findings here, we were able to recruit just over 250 Māori and non-Māori, and at every step, the potentially eligible Māori were more likely to say yes, they wanted to continue and to be recruited into the trial proper. We also had slightly higher follow-up of Māori than non-Māori at 12 months, with 98% for Māori and 95% for non-Māori. And at the end of the trial, 97% for Māori and 91% for non-Māori. The polypill, so this is self-reported adherence at 12 months. And so 79% of Māori on the polypill and 83% of non-Māori reported full adherence at 12 months. And in the usual care arm, so receiving those 4 different types of pills, 42% of Māori and 50% of non-Māori were fully adherent. Another interesting thing is that the difference between non-Māori and Māori was less in the polypill arm. So it looks like polypill will help to reduce some of those inequities in adherence to medication. So what were the important things? Again, important issue for participants. We had people, they desperately wanted to be on the polypill, which was called the Little Red Heart pill, and were disappointed if they were randomised to usual care. We had Māori and non-Māori investigators and research nurses, both Māori leadership or co-leadership, and really significant commitment from our non-Māori colleagues to equal explanatory power and to making the trial safe and appropriate for Māori. We used some specific stamping strategies because the Māori population is smaller, so we needed to kind of use more practices to identify enough Māori. So we chose practices that are a high proportion of Māori patients. We used lower thresholds for screening, so we tried to invite as many people to be screened to see as they were eligible as we could. And we continued Māori recruitment for 6 months after we finished non-Māori recruitment. The relationship between the research nurse and the participant was really good, so we had a whole lot of Māori research nurses, and they were the ones that had the initial conversations about participating and stayed with that person right the way through the trial, and so they had excellent relationships. We did home-based assessments, whānau were involved prior to enrolment, and of course we used kaupapa Māori processes and protocols and tikanga and koha for participation. The final trial I want to talk about is one that is underway at the moment. It's a research program that's underway at the moment, and it's looking at lung cancer screening with using low-dose CT scans. And you know, lung cancer is the leading cause of cancer deaths in Aotearoa. There are terrible inequities associated with it, with Māori 2 to 3 times more likely to be diagnosed and to die from lung cancer. And as this slide shows, lung cancer is the single largest contributor to the gap in life expectancy between Māori and non-Māori. And for women, it contributes 2.8 years of the 7.8 year difference. And for men, 1.7 years of the 8.6 year difference. This is Northern Region data. I don't think it'll be much different for the rest of the country. So, you know, big problem. And if we can do something about it, we have a real opportunity. So lung cancer screening with low-dose CT scans is effective. In international trials, they've demonstrated that it reduces lung cancer mortality by over 26% and actually 36% in women. And so, you know, we have the opportunity to make a real difference in lung cancer outcomes and in lung cancer inequities, but a lung cancer screening program in New Zealand has to work for Māori. If it doesn't, then we will increase those inequities. And there are already inequities in all of our other national screening programs. And so Tioranga Pukahukahu is our research program. It's a program where we're systematically collecting the information we need and testing strategies to ensure that a lung cancer screening program will work for Māori. It's a collaboration between Auckland and Waitemata regions and the University of Otago. So what are we doing to ensure that our work successfully includes Māori and that we're able to meet our aim? We've got Māori leadership across the whole program, and everyone involved with the project, Māori and non-Māori, is committed to the kaupapa and equity focused. Māori who might be eligible for lung cancer screening have been involved in the project from very early on. We have had focus groups of people who might be eligible and their whānau to hear what people thought about the idea about lung cancer screening, what would encourage them to participate, what would be a barrier, and how they would like to be invited to lung cancer screening. We did interviews that explored the same issues with a larger group of people, and we established Te Hākotahi, which is a Māori whānau group who continue to work with us and to help us design the next things that we're going to do. We have a steering group where 10 of the 13 members are Māori. We also have a technical advisory group and a relationship with one of the current international trials, the International Lung Screening Trial, and very strong, excuse me, local support from local Māori iwi and local Māori health leaders. This is the team that we're working with. This is the core team, and of course there is a larger team amongst various components of the work. But you can see that there's a range of ethnicities and a range of roles, and it's a great team to be working with. So what have we done? So early on we did our focus groups that I've described, and we did a reanalysis of a cost effectiveness study that had been undertaken. There'd been a cost effectiveness study that had been done in 2018, and they concluded that lung cancer screening would not be cost effective for anyone. And that was a showstopper to any conversation about lung cancer screening in New Zealand. And we were kind of like, oh, it doesn't make sense. That didn't make sense to us. And so we looked at what they had done, and they hadn't done hadn't had any consideration of equity. We had concerns about some of the parameters they'd used, and some of the information that they had in their analysis was quite old. So we repeated that cost effectiveness analysis where we updated some of the parameters and the information in it, and we did some equity kind of sensitivity analysis as well. And we showed that actually lung cancer screening was likely to be cost effective for everyone, but especially for Māori, and especially for Māori women. So that was good, and that actually restarted the whole conversation. We also did our surveys and established Te Hākotahi. And at the moment we are running an invitation trial. So when we spoke to Māori in our focus groups and surveys, we said, how would you like to be invited? Would you like your GP to invite you? Would you like a central invitation like bowel screening does? And a third of people said GP, a third said central, and a third said don't care, just want an invite. So we're testing that GP or central idea. We'll also be we've got some funding to look at how smoking-related lung disease, or COPD, is diagnosed and managed alongside this invitation trial. And we're also doing some bloods for circulating DNA and biomarkers alongside the invitation trial. We've also received funding for another project that's going to look at the way we predict people's risk, and we're starting that towards the end of the year. In our surveys, 91% of people said that they would attend a screening program if they were eligible, and another 8 said they might. So that was very encouraging. The biggest barriers were that 38% of people agreed that lung cancer couldn't be cured, and that's our experience of lung cancer. And 25% agreed that lung cancer treatment is worse than lung cancer itself. And again, I think that's our experience because a lot of the older treatments are pretty difficult for people. A third of people were worried that health workers would be judgmental about them because they were or had been a smoker. And so I think for us when we work with people, we really have to bear in mind that, aroha ki te tangata, love the person, hate the tobacco companies, they're the problem. The person that's smoking or has been a smoker is not the problem, and we cannot judge them because we will do harm because they will avoid us, and they'll avoid taking part in things like lung cancer screening. Things, that why they might want to take part, find lung cancer early, and to be able to reassure themselves and their whānau if they had a negative scan. And then things that would make attendance difficult, having other responsibilities, cost, worry again about being judged, transport and timing of appointments, and worry about radiation exposure. And they were concerns for around about 15% of people. I've mentioned the cost effectiveness study. So what is the lung cancer screening process? So we identify people who might be eligible for lung cancer screening. And in our trial, that is people who are 55 to 74, Māori, and are not in their GP recorded in their general practice notes as having been a never smoker. And then those eligible people undergo a risk assessment because with lung cancer screening, because it involves radiation, we don't want to screen everyone who's ever smoked. We only want to screen people who are at higher risk of developing a lung cancer. And so we use a risk prediction model called PLCO M2012. I'm sure you're all dying to know that. And then people who are above a risk threshold have a shared decision-making process. And if they decide to go ahead, they'll have a CT scan. And then there's a process, in the CT scans, we're really looking for nodules, so abnormal little areas, that some of them may go on to develop into a cancer. And there's a structured way that we manage those nodules depending on how big they are and what they look like, what their characteristics are like. There are also things called incidental findings, which are other things in the lungs or the top of the abdomen, because we scan right down to the bottom of the lungs, so we see parts of the liver and the adrenal glands. So we sometimes find things in other areas, and of course we have to take action on those. Outside of a research program, if we had a national program, then people would have repeat scans either at 1 or 2 yearly intervals, and there's still research happening internationally to decide what's the best interval. And we should be doing smoking cessation and COPD assessment and management alongside the lung cancer screening. I've talked about this, so who's involved in the trial, and that where our main outcome is comparing GP and central hub arms. But we're also collecting information that we will need to set up a national program. So things like what proportion of people we test are eligible for a CT scan, what proportion of people who have a risk assessment are eligible for a CT scan, what proportion of CT scans have an abnormal finding, how many cancers we find. So all of those types of things we're collecting information on. And so I'll just give you a wee taste of some of that secondary information. So this is to July 2022, and we had identified 814 people who might be eligible. About 10% of them we weren't able to contact or declined to go any further in the study. 189 people were not eligible to be in the study, so that was things like they'd had a CT scan of their chest in the last 2 years, those kind of things. So there were 400 in total where we were eligible to have risk assessment. There were also 53 people who deferred, and what that means is they haven't turned 55 yet this year, and so we've just put them off until they turn 55, and then we'll be in touch with them again. So 247 people had completed the risk assessment, and of those, 51% were eligible for a CT scan, and that's a little bit higher than we theorised. Of the people who were eligible for a CT scan, of those 126, just under 90% had chosen to go ahead with a CT scan, and that was a little bit higher than we'd theorised as well. And early days, but we're very happy. And interestingly, it's consistent with what the findings were in the questionnaire, where 91% of people said that they would definitely have a scan. We had completed, at that point, 96 scans, and 92 had been reviewed by the radiologist. 75% of people have essentially a normal scan, good news. And then the other 25% have nodules, which require repeat scans either at 12 months or 3 months, or in some instances, direct referral for investigation. And we have diagnosed a number of cancers. And the number of cancers we've diagnosed is pretty consistent with what we'd expect from the international trials. Here's what we ask people what about their experience, and here's what people say. I was very happy to see my invite. I think it should be rolled out nationally. And I was thrilled to see we're taking specific steps. So I think this kind of reflects that people are happy to participate if they see it as an important issue for them. Again, very favourable responses and around the staff that were running the research project. And again, I think reflecting that, if you have the right people engaging with people, then that is really helpful and supportive for participants. And I thought this is a great quote. This is someone who did not meet the risk threshold at the risk assessment. I was 50-50 pleased and relieved, but a little bit disappointed. So it's very early days, and I hope I'm not jinxing myself. But we're very encouraging. And again, the things I think that are important have been helpful are an important issue, an absolute commitment amongst this team to designing lung cancer screening that works for Māori. We've got substantial Māori leadership and support, not only in the team, but also, the iwi support, Māori health, other Māori health leadership support. And non-Māori colleagues who are totally committed to the kaupapa as well. We've had co-design right from the get-go, and that's ongoing. And the majority of staff interacting with participants are Māori. And of course, we have tikanga and appropriate protocols and processes. So I wanted to acknowledge that there are many past and present projects that I haven't been able to talk about tonight, and their absence isn't a measure of a lack of importance, but simply that I couldn't find a narrative that would encompass everything in the 45 minutes that were available. Finally, I want to thank my whānau and my friends who come kāno hiki kānohi and on the web. I want to acknowledge my dad, who passed away 12 years ago from lung cancer. So, nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. I think so. Have you got the word? No. No.
Come into a big room. How
are you?
Manu tiria manu wera hea ki te poho te raka katou e katou ai te rui e tau e koia ko tarariki ki mai e tāna i te whitu i te waru e tau e koia koia.
We did get a solo soprano because Sue left a mic on. Kia ora koutou. I'm Trish Priest. I'm the Acting Pro-Vice-Chancellor of Health Sciences at the moment, and I'm here to thank Professor Sue Kringle for her excellent lecture, Myth Takes About Māori and Research. I'm particularly delighted to be the one who's doing this. I started as the Head of Department of Preventive and Social Medicine on the same day as Sue started in her position in the department. And I was the Head of Department when I managed to bully her into applying for promotion.
I'm very thankful.
Yeah. And in fact, we both got promoted in the same round. And I can tell you that if you need someone to keep a secret, Sue's your woman. Because the way it happens is the Vice-Chancellor rings you a few days before the announcement and says, now you've got your promotion, but you're not allowed to tell anyone. So I rang Sue and said, have you had any calls from the Vice-Chancellor? And she said, no. Which was actually a lie. And so now that Sue no longer sits within preventive and social medicine, I had to get a different job so that I could thank her for her IPL, because I turn out to still be her boss. Now, the waiata we just sang is about planting seeds at the right time of the year for the best food production. And Sue has given us just a few examples of how over her career she has planted ideas and people which will come to fruition in improvements in hauora Māori and reductions in health inequities. In this lecture, Sue has demonstrated through her work that, as well as the really interesting and important results of the studies, Māori are enthusiastic to participate in research, to be recruited and stay in the project if. And it's the if that Sue has clearly identified and from which many of us can learn. So from the projects that Sue described to us, we learn that if the research is important to Māori, the research participants and their whānau and caregivers. It's Māori-led and co-designed. There is a deliberate strategy to recruit Māori that's appropriate in terms of process and time frame. Structured information is provided in culturally appropriate ways by the right people. Interviews are carried out in a place that suits participants by someone they can relate to and trust. And participants' time and contribution is acknowledged, then Māori participation, recruitment and retention in research can be excellent. Sue has truly demonstrated that some of the stereotyped ideas about research with Māori that she has discussed are indeed myths. I actually met Sue first about 20 years ago when we both worked on the cervical cancer audit in Auckland. She was inspiring even then, as well as being great fun to work with, and it's been so great to catch up with her again back here and work alongside her. There are so many things that Sue has done or is doing, and people she's supported and inspired that she didn't have time to talk about tonight. Sue is a force of nature. I have no idea how she manages to do all of the things she does in teaching and research, service to Māori, to health, to the university and to the country, not to mention as a clinician. And many of our discussions when I was head of department, apart from bullying her into applying for promotion, were me saying, Sue, you just can't take anything more on. You have to start saying no to people. I was obviously largely unsuccessful. I have nothing but admiration for Sue. I think that's a brilliant example of getting your first HRC grant and then thinking, I'll just do a Harkness Fellowship while I'm at it. It's typical Sue. Anyway, we at Otago are lucky and proud to have Sue as a member of our staff, and I am absolutely delighted to congratulate her on her promotion and to celebrate with her. Now, I have a gift. A very exciting gift from the university in recognition of this moment. And I would like you to first finish listening to me, join me in congratulating Sue, and then join us in the staff club for refreshments to continue celebrating Sue's amazing career so far and looking forward to what comes next.